It is Thursday. It is the 29th of May. I'm Moon Kwon-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. The final opinion polls before next week's local election show neck-and-neck races between the rival parties in some key regions. Now, from this point forward, media outlets including ARIRANG TV will no longer be able to release new figures that could sway public opinion. Washington begins this week a new push to expand cooperation in Asia to counter the threat of North Korean missiles. One includes considering a missile defense system in South Korea. And Korea's current account surplus in April surged to a record as exports rose sharply, but a fall in imports in the latest month reinforces a worrying erosion of domestic consumption. We'll have those stories and more, but first with the local elections. Now, just 6 days are left until Koreans head to the voting booths for the local elections. And beginning this Thursday, new opinion polls are prohibited from being released on the media, and early voting will start nationwide. Our Kwon Soa has the details.
The races are tightening up with less than a week to go until the elections. Voters are in the final stages of deciding on which mayor or governor they want to represent them. The latest poll numbers show the ruling Saenuri Party has the upper hand in 6 regions, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy in 5, an independent candidate in 1, and the rest of the 5 regions are neck and neck at this stage. An opinion poll conducted by Research&Research has the incumbent mayor of Seoul Park Won-soon still in lead over his conservative rival Chung Mong-joon, but the gap has narrowed compared to 2 weeks ago. In Gyeonggi-do province, which has the largest number of eligible voters, the ruling Saenuri Party's candidate for the governor's post has a slight lead over the opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo. A very tense race is expected in Busan, which is getting a lot of attention this time around, as independent candidate Oh Go-don is receiving great support. Voter sentiment will become more unpredictable in the following days, as from this Thursday, the National Election Commission forbids the release of newly conducted opinion polls to the media. Anything could happen in the coming days to turn these ratings on their head, as the voter tendency among different age groups and voter turnout play a big role in the actual results. For those who won't be able to vote on the actual voting day, early voting for the first time in Korea will begin Friday for 2 days at some 3,500 polling stations across the country. Kwon Soa, ARIRANG News.
Now moving on, former Supreme Court Justice An Dae-hee's sudden withdrawal as President Park Geun-hye's nominee for Prime Minister has left her reform plans in tatters. In fact, it's expected to delay the entire restructuring process and possibly other administrative affairs. Our correspondent Choi Yoo-sun has this report.
When President Park announced her pick for Prime Minister 1 week ago, it was considered by many as a reflection of her commitment to reform Korean society. Former Supreme Court Justice An Dae-hee's principles and integrity were highly touted upon his nomination. It was said those traits would help him carry out sweeping reforms, despite the fact that he had butted heads with the president during her campaign in 2012 while spearheading the ruling party's political reforms. But President Park's nomination quickly backfired after An was accused of receiving privileges for his previous post in the private sector. It was discovered that he made about $1.5 million in a period of just 5 months last year working as a lawyer after leaving the Supreme Court. The president, who had pledged to root out cronyism in Korean society in the aftermath of the Seoul ferry disaster, ended up nominating someone who was at the very center of it. An's surprise resignation Wednesday has dented the president's efforts to reform the government and to assuage public anger over the government's lax management of the ferry accident. The president is widely expected to take more time to make her next pick, possibly after next Wednesday's local elections. This means the much-anticipated cabinet reshuffle will not likely take place until after mid-June. It's also uncertain as to when the president will name her new security advisor and intelligence chief. And amid criticism over the latest personnel debacle, the fate of Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun and other aides at the presidential office are also now in question. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
Authorities have so far been unable to track down Yoo Byung-eun, the practical owner of the sunken solo ferry who remains on the run. But they have tracked down his assets, which total well over $200 million, and they are now taking steps to freeze them. For the latest on the investigation, here's our Kim Hyung-gil.
Korean prosecutors said Wednesday that they have started taking legal steps to freeze more than $200 million worth of assets held by the owner family of the sunken Seoul ferry. Yoo Byung-eun, the head of Cheonghaejin Marine Company, which operated the ill-fated ferry, and his family are suspected of having accumulated at least $234 million worth of earnings through various crimes both at home and abroad. The Incheon District Prosecutor's Office, which is leading the case, said it has asked the Incheon District Court to freeze the assets of Yoo and his 3 children to prevent them from stashing away cash or real estate holdings before trials. Yoo and his 3 children, Seomna, Daegyun, and Hyukgi, are wanted on a string of corruption charges and irregularities that are believed to have contributed to the sinking of the ferry. It is all part of an effort to hold the fugitive family criminally liable for the deadly April 16th disaster. Meanwhile, a French court has rejected a request by Yoo Byung-eun's eldest daughter, Seomna, to be released on bail. The process for having her extradited to Korea began Wednesday, but could take up to a year. Kim Hyung-gil, ARIRANG News.
Now, on the economic side of things, April was another bullish month for Korea in terms of its current account surplus. Central bank officials attribute last month's surplus to firm auto and steel exports. Here's our ARIRANG News' Hwang Ji-hye with the details.
Korea has been posting a current account surplus every month for more than 2 years. The central bank said Thursday that the nation posted a surplus of over $7.1 billion last month. That's a tad less than the $7.3 billion surplus in March, but up by more than $2.5 billion from the same month last year. The Bank of Korea has forecast the surplus for the year to reach $68 billion. This target looks attainable considering the accumulated surplus in the January to April period that already stands at over $22 billion. Exports rose 10% from the previous year in April to more than $56 billion, helped by strong shipments of automobiles, petroleum, and steel products. But imports dropped 0.9% to $46 billion, raising concerns the nation's continuous surplus trend is mostly down to sluggish domestic demand. The strong current account surplus might also burden local exporters in that it will add additional upward pressure to the strengthening Korean won. The deficit in the service account, which includes tourism and shipping, however, widened, posting a shortfall of around $1 billion last month compared with a deficit of $650 million in March. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Korean construction firms have won nearly $31 billion worth of overseas orders so far this year. The Land Ministry and the International Contractors Association of Korea say that's up 33% compared to the same period last year. Now, it's only the second time for the amount to surpass the $30 billion mark in the first half of the year. The first time was in 2010, but given that that was when Korea's $20 billion nuclear power plant deal with the United Arab Emirates was sealed, industry officials say this is essentially the first time the amount has topped the $30 billion mark before the end of June. The government attributed the increase to local companies winning huge projects in countries like Kuwait and Iraq. Now let's move over to the local stock market. Seoul shares were trading lower in late morning trading this Thursday, tracking overnight loss in the U.S. market. And as of 1:30 p.m. Korea time, the benchmark Kospi was trading down 0.3% at a bit shy of 2012. The tech-heavy Kosdaq was trading nearly flat at 550, while on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency was trading a tad bit stronger, although nearly flat against the greenback at 1,021.3 won.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market. For the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Now, the United States is weighing up whether to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea. The Pentagon is making a fresh push to expand a U.S.-led system to its allies in Northeast Asia to counter the North Korean missile threat. Our Park Ji-won has this report.
Quoting a Pentagon official, the Wall Street Journal reports that Washington has conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations in South Korea for its Theater High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. No final decision has been made yet on the system, which is designed to intercept a diverse range of missiles. South Korean officials have long indicated that Seoul would prefer to develop its own defenses rather than taking part in the U.S.-led system. With that in mind, the report quotes the Pentagon official as saying that the U.S. could deploy the THAAD system to South Korea for a temporary period and then replace it with another system purchased by Seoul. It could also let Seoul buy its own missile defense system. The vice chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, James Winnefeld, meanwhile, is calling for better regional missile defense cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Speaking at a seminar in Washington Wednesday, Winnefeld emphasized the importance of developing a regional missile defense system between its main allies to effectively counter North Korean threats. U.S. Congress also passed a bill last week calling on the Defense Secretary to assess the opportunities to strengthen ballistic missile defense cooperation among Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. This is raising pressure on South Korea to join the U.S.-led missile defense system. Given Seoul's reluctance to join the U.S.-led system and the development of its own missile defense system, the issue is expected to be one of top agenda items at an upcoming trilateral meeting between the defense chiefs of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. The officials are scheduled to meet this weekend on the sidelines of the Asia Security Summit in Singapore. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Now, North Korea, a friend or a foe? Well, a new survey shows more than half of the South Korean people see North Korea as a partner of cooperation rather than an enemy. A poll commissioned by the Unification Ministry shows 58% of the 1,000 respondents said they view the North as a country that South Korea should and does cooperate with. Just under a quarter says Seoul should provide aid to North Korea, while only 13% viewed North Korea as a hostile state. Now, in regards to President Park Geun-hye's North Korea policies, 77% replied they supported her push for a trust-building process with Pyongyang. 7 out of 10 also agreed with her description of unification as a bonanza. A UN Human Rights Office aimed with monitoring human rights conditions in North Korea will be set up right here in South Korea. The Geneva-based Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights said Wednesday that its field-based structure will be set up in Seoul, with the South Korean government giving it approval. The decision to open the Seoul office was made after the UN Council adopted a report in March denouncing North Korea's systematic human rights violations. Now, the field office, which will be operated independently according to UN's basic principles, is expected to be set up in the latter half of this year. Now on to some very welcome news for the nation's farmers. Korea has regained its status as a nation free of foot and mouth disease. The Agriculture Ministry says its efforts to contain and prevent outbreaks since 2011 have been recognized by the World Organization for Animal Health. 3.5 million livestock were culled in Korea after a foot-and-mouth outbreak at the end of 2010, but there have been no reported cases of the viral infection since then, and the situation was brought under control. The World Organization for Animal Health has also declared Korea as being safe from mad cow disease, goat plague, and African horse sickness. Korean officials say the changes will help boost the nation's meat exports. Now, on to a very different story. The global war between Samsung and Apple has largely been waged on the smartphone battlefield. But Samsung's latest product, a gadget for your wrist that promises to keep your health in check, may just represent the first shot in another looming battle. Our UDN explains.
It looks much like the Galaxy smartwatch, but this wristband called a SIM-band is what Samsung calls a health platform to rule them all. Readings for heart rate, blood flow, hydration level, and the amount of CO2 in your blood can all be obtained when different wavelengths of light are beamed onto your skin from the device. It can also gather data from non-Samsung health trackers as well, using cloud-based software. Samsung unveiled the SIM-band in San Francisco this week, just days before Apple is expected to detail plans for its own health data platform. It's a signal that the smartphone battlefield may now begin to extend to the mobile healthcare device sector. And it's not just global tech giants, but also mid-sized firms that are jumping in. This was evident at Asia's biggest healthcare congress that kicked off this week. Take this portable heart monitor, for example.
The device can send the collected data to your smartphone via Bluetooth. You can then send it to your doctor directly.
This medicine dispenser is useful for patients who often forget to take their medicine.
Pharmacists have information that you take the right pill at the right time, and also is the patient send back the information about the compliance.
Experts say the demand for such mobile health devices will continue to rise.
Since people live longer, there's a greater desire to take care of their health themselves. As there is a lot of data made available through different sensor technologies, there is naturally a rise in businesses that provide health services utilizing that data.
Yurian, ARIRANG News.
It's now time for our daily arts and culture segment, and we're going to be talking about opera. Now, when we say opera, we think of Italian operas, German operas, so something European, not Korean about it. But today, we're going to be talking about homegrown operas right here in Korea. And of course, our Im Yoon-hee joins me live in the studio. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So this Korean opera is called Soulmate, is it? And this will be staged this weekend.
Exactly. So this opera is part of the Korea Opera Festival, which is being held at the Seoul Art Center by the Korea National Opera. And now so far for this festival, they've shown some very popular European operas as well as foreign operas, such as Puccini's Madame Butterfly and Salome. But to close the festival, they've chosen an original Korean opera that has gained world recognition. So now let's take a look.
After almost a month of performances, the Korea National Opera wraps up this year's opera festival with an original Korean opera. Soulmate is a comic opera that brings centuries of Korean traditions to the stage while adapting to suit the modern audience.
We use traditional Korean ballads as well as traditional music to make fun scenes that share the stories of the characters. There's a mix of tension and relaxation that can be heard in our voices when we sing like this.
In 2006, Soulmate made a debut at the Frankfurt Opera House in Germany and was praised for its integrity in portraying Korean traditions while learning to utilize the techniques of European operas. A few months later, the performance was brought by the Korea National Opera to the Seoul Art Center. And 8 years down the line, the performance is once again being staged. The opera is performed in Korean, and the musicality of the piece successfully weaves together a story of one couple's traditional Korean wedding ceremony and the many customs and traditions that go along with it, all while creating opportunities for a couple laughs in the process.
Contrary to the previous versions, this time the tragic scenes of the opera was reduced. And we expanded on events like the wedding ceremony and having a baby in order to create more chances for comedic scenes.
It's an opera of a much lighter nature, that people from all backgrounds can relate to. An opera that brings lyrical voices to the stage. Voices that sing the story of weddings and of families, and in the end, of happily ever afters.
You know, Yoon-hee, I don't think I have seen many of these operas with such an upbeat tone to it. I mean, many of the operas that we're familiar with, they're rather tragic or a little bit heavy on the content side.
I think to go for the dramatic factor, many of the performances do, you know, contain this very dark, sort of depressing theme sometimes, such as Madame Butterfly. You know, they showed it has a very tragic suicide at the end. Samson and Delilah, they showed it has a horrible betrayal. So some pretty sad scenes. But, you know, for this performance, they really wanted to change things around, be a little bit different. So the writer actually said that she wanted to create a performance, an opera, where people were able to see the lives around them and appreciate them through a performance like this opera.
Right. I mean, I think it's sometimes, and most of the time, arts and culture, it really provides a therapeutic counseling kind of an effect for us human beings. And sometimes you can watch an opera like this and take a breather and, you know, think again and really relax and let go of whatever the burdens, the emotional burdens that you have. And I think I actually heard the director saying that he actually would like for the Korean people to heal through his performance following the tragic Seoul accident and, of course, a string of accidents that followed afterwards.
So Korea has really been under a pretty big burden lately, very pretty down in terms of the emotions. But so this particular performance, the director said he started way before the accidents, the slew of accidents that we've seen. However, in light of the accident, he said that this is an opportunity he feels for people to really come together and to really heal. Now, he said that there was, or I don't know if you've noticed, but there was a kind of a drop-off in the arts and culture after the accidents, right? So the performances, many of them were canceled, many of the shows, the festivals were canceled, and so it was unfortunate. But, you know, this kind of performance, a little bit happy, upbeat, it's not too strong. It's a perfect way for people to come together, but most of all, it sends a message to the audience that they really need to take a step back and appreciate the lives around them.
Right. Perhaps it's time for us to not forget those victims from the disaster, but remember them, but still move on with our lives and make the most out of it. All right, Yoon-hee, thank you so much for this report. And this runs until Saturday night, I believe?
Sunday night.
Sunday night,
all
right?
This weekend, yes.
Right, right. So we will have the weekend to check it out. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon. Now we can expect a hotter day today compared to yesterday, with the daytime highs mostly in the mid-30s, now which aren't typical readings for the month of May. Now we can also expect high UV levels today due to the clear sunny skies across the nation, so make sure you apply sunblock when heading out. Now, however, it's not completely clear as the high levels of the fine and yellow dust remains over our nation, and a fine dust advisory is in effect, however, which has a reading around 230 micrograms, while the southern regions are over 200 as well. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 31 degrees this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 31 and 27 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 27, Dokdo peaks at 26, while Mount Kumgang tops out at 23. Now, that's all for Korea. Now, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's just about all for me at this hour. I'm Moon Gon-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.